Welcome to SoundScore. My name is Molly Morkowski, and I'm a pianist living in New York City and the founder of this platform. This event marks SoundScore's inaugural composition masterclass with esteemed guest composer and BMI judge, Jeremy Gill. I would like to thank Jeremy and the BMI Foundation, who has generously partnered with SoundScore to bring this class to the larger virtual community. It is missional to SoundScore to bring this class and opportunities like this one more frequently, and so we're really grateful to BMI Foundation for coming alongside us. We are going to be offering another class at the end of January. I just quickly want to mention it, and we'll put the information in the chat. That class will be on writing for Middle Eastern percussion and frame drums, and that will be led by one of our SoundScore artists, Yusuf Sharonik, who's a master in that field. And we also want to mention that the site is now published, and so while the score functionality of the page is not yet up because we're in beta testing, and you'll know more what that means when you take a look around, we really want to invite you to take a look at our artists, look at the composers that are affiliated with us, look at what we're going to be offering. You know, there's ways for you guys to write and tell us, hey, what about a class in this? What about a class in that? We welcome it, and we're super excited to be able to share the site with you. So on to today's great guest composer. Jeremy is a conductor, a pianist, and a composer, a triple threat in music. So I heard him give this talk a couple days ago as we prepared for today, and I was taken especially by the fact that he's looking at all of these scores as a judge from the perspective of having conducted, having performed, and then also as a composer. So I think that makes his input for you all today extremely valuable. He has worked with some of the most famous and relevant performing artists in the realm of new music, and you have only to read about him and realize the breadth of his career already. If you haven't already checked out his music or about him, I encourage you to do that, and we will place also in the chat a link to his website. Just this last year, just a couple highlights, he wrote a four-hand piano concerto for Shai Wasner and Orion Weiss, and as a pianist, those are two of my favorites here in New York, and so I'm dying to get my hands on the score. And he also last year was distinguished by the Academy of Arts and Letters by winning the Goddard Lieberson Prize. Not only that, he's also been finding ways to stay relevant and continue to work during this pandemic time, which I'm sure all of us can relate to the importance of doing that, just so that we have a path forward and we just continue making our music. So all these things, being a conductor, composer, pianist, and entrepreneur, make him super valuable. So just so you know, when I hopped on a call with Jeremy recently to ask him if he would be a part of the SoundScore affiliated composers roster, it was him who suggested that we do this class. And he just really thought it might be helpful for you all as you navigate the world of competitions. So I'm just deeply honored to have Jeremy as a part of our community and to be our very first guest composer at SoundScore. So thrilled. And also joining us today is Deirdre Chadwick, who is the executive director of BMI Classical here in New York City and also the president of the BMI Foundation. So without further ado, Jeremy, thank you for being here, and welcome to the SoundScore community, everybody.
And hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for tuning in for this chat. It's about half an hour, and at the end, we'll take questions, and Deirdre will join us for questions there in case there are things that she's better equipped to answer than I am. So I'm going to jump right in. It's perennially popular to despise competitions of all sorts. A composer no less than Bela Bartok has famously said that competitions are for horses, not for artists. Great, seems clear where he stands, except in 1927, he applied for and was the co-winner of a composition prize from the Musical Fund Society of Philadelphia for his third string quartet. So he could hate competitions, but at the same time, he was applying for them. And in 1927, he was 46 years old. So not exactly a young composer at that point. You can look through online the list of BMI Student Composer Award winners through the years. Lots of names you'll recognize, lots of names you won't. The composers, their careers went in different directions, or they decided to do something else with their lives. At the same time, you'll notice that a lot of composers that are very active today, very successful composers, never won the award. So what is it about a composition award? What is it good for? I think it's good for a bit of encouragement. And I think it's really, really important for you to keep that in perspective. That's all a composition award is. You do the hard work of writing music every day. And that's what counts. That's what matters, not, sorry, I'm having a problem here with my computer. Okay, sorry about that. The hard work that you do every day is what matters. And when if you're lucky enough to get an award, great. It's a little bit of encouragement. Just take it for that and keep working. I was once very disappointed. I think I was a freshman. I was a freshman at Eastman. I was studying with Sam Adler, and I had applied for some award and I didn't get it. And Adler said to me, "Jeremy, I have lost more awards than you will ever apply for." And that was great to hear as a young composer. So I urge you, apply for everything, expect to win nothing, and just keep working. If you do apply, though, for awards, you make them as best as you can. And that's what this talk is about, to sort of help you, first of all, understand the process. Specifically, we'll talk about the process at BMI Student Composer Awards, which is where I've been a judge for the past 4 years. And then we'll talk about general advice for submitting to competitions. And then lastly, I'll offer some suggestions about how to submit your best work, how to choose and submit your best work. So a quick disclaimer, BMI obviously knows about this talk, they've supported it, and I have run my notes and thoughts by my preliminary judge colleagues so I could get the best possible information to you today. However, at the end of the day, this is my subjective take on the process and my subjective ideas about what you can do. I'm not an officer of BMI, I'm not a representative of BMI. I'm just a judge who looks at hundreds of scores every year, and I'm giving you my thoughts about what you can do. So, preparing your submission, first thing. Number one, most important thing, it seems very obvious, but make sure you follow the rules. They're often very clear, very simple. You can find them on the BMI site. Follow them to the letter. Of particular note, BMI, like many competitions, is an anonymous competition. Your scores should be anonymized. When you are submitting anonymized scores, please open your music notation program. Use Dorico, Sibelius, Finale, whatever it is. Open the program, open your piece file, and remove your name from the piece file. Remove the copyright information, remove commissioning information. Remove it from that original file and export that as a PDF. Don't take an existing PDF and put a white box over your name, a white box over the copyright information. We judges, when we look at your scores, we do it online. Our first pass through your scores all happens online. And different browsers render PDFs in different ways. It is not uncommon for us to open a PDF, and if you have a white box over your name, the PDF renders first, and then the white box renders afterwards. And in the meantime, even if it's just a second, we've seen your name. If we see your name, we have to recuse ourselves. So you don't want any judge to have to recuse themselves before even looking at your piece. So open your program, remove all the information, and make a new PDF from that clean, anonymized copy. While you're at it, get rid of all performance information. So it's not useful, and it's quite distracting to have a paragraph at the beginning of a score that says, my sonata for flute and tuba was commissioned by blank and first premiered by blank at the blank hall in blank. It's not useful. It's really distracting. And in the worst case, it makes it seem like you're trying to impress us with your credentials. And all we care about is your score. So just get rid of all that information that's unnecessary and just give us the information, your score, the music. Scores are disqualified only if you don't follow these rules, only if you don't follow the rules at the beginning, right? no scores are taken out of competition before we preliminary judges look at the scores. There's nobody making a decision, oh, I don't think this will be a competitive score, I'm going to get rid of it. We see everything that is submitted according to the rules. And when we do get your scores, all we see is your age, your gender, and the score itself. That's all we get. That's all the information we see. So now I'm going to tell you very quickly about the specific BMI Student Composer Awards process. So this is not necessarily unique to BMI, but this is the BMI process. And again, this is subjective. This is my experience over the past several years. And this will, the preliminary judges, our assessment of your scores will happen in 2 stages. In the past several years, we've received about 450 scores each year, we preliminary judges. We usually have about 5 to 6 weeks to go through those 450-ish scores, and from them we'll select about 100, which we will then, in the second stage, meet as a group to discuss. So those 450 scores, if I have about 5 to 6 weeks to look at them, what I personally do is I divide the number of days I have to look at your scores I take the number of scores that I have and I divide it by the number of days I have in order to review them. And that usually comes to about a dozen scores a day. So what I personally do is I look at a dozen scores every single day for about 5 to 6 weeks until I'm done. I spend about 1 to 2 hours looking through the scores each day. So that means I'm spending about 5 to 10 minutes on each score, just as a ballpark. At the end of that original process, again, we judges will get together and we will discuss in person the 100 or so scores that have received the highest rankings. We rank individually according to a 4-point system. And from those 100 scores that we have as we get together as a group, we select about 40 that will go on to the final round. And that final round is assessed by a separate, totally separate group of judges. We don't know who they are. It's not announced till after the competition. And they pick the final winners from that group of 40 or so that we send to them. 2 things that are really important for you to know. Number 1, any score that gets the highest ranking from any of we 4 preliminary judges. So any score that one of us says, this one gets our highest ranking, this is the number 4, that score will automatically be discussed by the group together. That's good, because that means that if one person really likes your score, they have a chance to argue for your score to the other judges. So one person can make a big difference. If they really like your score, they can argue for your score to their colleagues. As well, each of us are allowed to nominate one score to go on to the final round. So we call it a wild card. So if I absolutely adore your piece and all of the other judges don't, I can say, you know what? I think this one should go on to the final round, and I send it on. One score, each of us is allowed to do this too. This is why it's so important that you anonymize your scores at the beginning of the process, because you want every single judge to have the opportunity to see your score and potentially say, this is the score that I want to send directly on to the final round. It's really, really important that you have everybody looking at your scores. One last thing about BMI specifically, and then I'll talk about things that are sort of general suggestions for you in terms of submitting your scores. BMI does not accept recordings for traditionally notated works. This is great for you. It might not seem like it, but it's great for you because it levels the playing field tremendously. So if you are a young composer who's fortunate enough to be doing their undergrad at Juilliard or Curtis or pick your place, you have access to some of the best young performers that are around. And they are going to give great performances of your pieces. and you'll be able to send really, really good recordings around. If you're at a school with a very modest performance program, let's say, or even no performance program, such schools exist, you don't have that. You can't send us a recording, a great recording of your piece. If you're in high school, you may not have access to great performance. The first time I won BMI, I was in high school and I submitted a string quartet that had never been performed. I won with a string quartet that had never been performed. That would be impossible if recordings were required. So it's really good for you that you can submit scores. You can submit your best work regardless of whether or not it's been performed. However, there's one thing to keep in mind. If you write music that looks like this is a page from John Cage's aria. If you write music, graphic music, music that looks like this, absolutely send a recording along with your score. This kind of score doesn't tell us much about what the music sounds like. And of course, for Cage, his music was written with the collaboration of lots of trusted performers that he knew and worked with all of his life. So the final product is very different from the score that you see. So if you write this kind of music, if you notate it in this way, great. Just make sure that you send a score or send a recording along with the score, and make sure, please, that you include very detailed instructions about what your symbols mean and how the performers are making the kind of performance choices that they are making. Good. So now let's go on to things, general suggestions about what you can submit. This absolutely applies to BMI Student Composer Awards, but I would say just as well applies to any other kind of competition that you're applying for. If you have even a single transposing instrument in your piece, please tell us whether the score is in C or transposing. The best place, I think, to put that information is in the upper left-hand corner of the first page of music. Remember, I, as a judge, am spending 5 to 10 minutes looking at your score, and you don't want me to spend the first 2 minutes trying to figure out if the clarinet sounds a step lower than written. It happens a lot. So please say whether the score is transposed or in C. Either is a legitimate choice, you just have to tell us which one you're doing. Related to that, many music notation programs will have as their default setting the provision of key signatures for transposing instruments. So you'll write the score in C, that is, without any kind of key signature at all, and the program will provide 2 sharps for clarinets and B flat, etc. You shouldn't do this unless you are in fact writing in a key. So it is not correct to write let's say, a non-tonal score and have a key signature in a transposing part. Only use a key signature, and only use key signatures in transposing instruments if you are in fact writing in a key. Tonal music's fine, non-tonal music is fine. Just use key signatures only if you're writing a tonal piece or a piece using a key signature. Great. Speaking of large scores. I will bet that you find this difficult to read. I certainly do. This is a page from Ligeti's Atmosphere. And of course, Ligeti had very good reasons for dividing the instruments in the way that he does. You see, you've got flute 1, 2, 3, 4, clarinet 1, 2, 3, 4, violins 1 through 14, violins 1, violins 2, 1 through 14, etc. Ligeti was dealing with micro polyphony and sort of figuring out how all that was going to work, and it was necessary for him to deal with each individual instrument. But in general, you don't need to do this. Most of you are probably not going to be writing that specific kind of music it will be much, much, much more useful not to have multiple staves. So what we don't want to see, and what is very distracting and hard to deal with, is flute, 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 oboe, 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 clarinet, 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 and all the flutes are playing in unison, all the winds are playing in a sort of choralish texture, something like this. Horn, 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 horn is very common. Compress the score as much as possible. Sam Adler, in his orchestration book, recommends that you put, for instance, doubled wind, or if you have double winds, to put 2 flutes, for instance, on a single line, 2 oboes on a single line, etc. Clarinets. Horns, 1 and 2 on a line, 3 and 4 on a line. If you have 3 trumpets, 1, 2 on a line, 3 separately. This makes more work for you. It's more work to put the music into your notation program in this way. It's more work when you're making parts later because you have to pull them apart, but it is the standard for orchestral scores, and much more importantly, it is infinitely easier to read. Do be careful though, I have one other example along those lines. Do be careful if you are minimizing or getting rid of the parts that are resting. This is not super helpful. This is a page from the original Polish edition of Ludosławski's Concerto for Orchestra. So the horns aren't playing, so there's a big gap here. The trombones aren't playing, big gap. The poor little violas are here by themselves with no strings. This can actually be more difficult to read if you just get rid of empty staves and leave these big gaps. Do notice, of course, that Ludosławski is putting 2 flutes on a line, 2 oboes on a line, etc. But the gaps are not super useful. A great example, which I just thought of at the end, so I'm sorry I don't have a printed out version, but you can see that a bit. This is the last page of Mahler 9, and you see just the strings playing. Of course, at the end, we actually lose the double basses, so we just have the first and second violins, viola, and the cello, that what Bernstein called the magical last page of Mahler 9. And of course, Mahler 9 has quadruple winds and 3 trumpets and 4 horns, etc. Massive orchestra, but there at the end, we only see the essential bits, only see what we need to see. Great. I have a couple of special notes for two-handed players. I am a pianist, so this applies to piano music. It also applies to harp music. It applies to marimba music. Anything that you would typically notate on multiple staves and that has the use of 2 hands, and that roughly corresponds to 1 hand per stave. It's really important that you show us how the hands are being deployed. So I have a couple of examples here that I made. So this is the opening of the B-flat major prelude from the first book of the Waldheimer Clavier, by Bach. Unfortunately, I see this a lot in scores where a keyboard part is written without any regard to how the hands are deployed. Even if you're not a pianist, imagine sitting at the piano and reading this score. What it suggests is that the first bar is played with the right hand, which is very awkward. The second bar is played by the left hand, which is very awkward. And then we go back and forth, etc. However, the way Bach notated it in the way that it's published, like this. It's exactly the same music, same notes, same durations, but this one shows us how the hands are working. It's really frustrating if you're a pianist. The first thing you have to do is sit down, you get a new piece of music, and the first thing you have to do is essentially rewrite the part like this from this so you can play it. Don't make your pianists do that. Don't make harpists do that. Same thing. Don't make marimba players do that. Give them a score that they can use that shows the disposition of the hands. And for us, as judges, we're looking at this score and and we need to see that. We need to see that you're thinking about how the instrument works. If you're not a pianist, you might not do everything perfectly. It's fine. It's totally fine. But just give us a sense that you're dealing with the reality of the instruments and you're thinking about how the player actually physically functions. A special note about vocal music. If you're writing vocal music, one thing that immediately jumps out to judges when we're looking at vocal music is prosody. So how do you set the text? I'll show you a lovely example. A friend of mine was doing some Christmas shopping and she snapped this photo for me. So I'll sing it for you in the wrong key, but have yourself a merry little Christmas, let your heart be light. There's a note at the end, but no word right here. Right? So this is obviously an egregious example of a poor prosody, of not reflecting the natural stress of the text in the music. Nobody says little. We need to have time to say Christmas, not just on one quarter note. Now, you could argue that you're making choices, and lots of composers do. You probably know the Poulenc Gloria in excelsis Deo. Nobody says Deo, but Poulenc said it that way. If you want to know how not to pronounce Latin, you can listen to Stravinsky's Oedipus Rex. Certainly composers sometimes make choices about how to set text, and they will intentionally set against the natural declamation of the text. Usually it's clear when a composer is doing that intentionally, and if we have an example like the one I just showed you, what it suggests to us is that there is a disconnect between how you are feeling and interpreting the stress of the text and how you understand rhythmic stress. So we will work through that and try to find if your kernel idea is intentional, but you just know that not honoring the prosody of the natural prosody of the text is sort of a red flag. It's something that we see and we think, I wonder if this composer has really figured out how to deal with text in this way. None of these things I'm saying to you, by the way, I want to be very clear about this. None of these things I'm saying to you will disqualify your pieces. These are simply things that come up a lot when we're looking at scores and that give us pause. They say to us, you have to dig further and see what's going on, what this composer is really going for. So if you're making choices, making clear choices that counter any of these things I'm saying, it should come through. Don't worry about that. We're going to work through your scores to try to find the kernel. So that said, I want to just talk about this last point in terms of general suggestions for you. We're going to work through the complexities of the score, but we do occasionally come across scores that sort of overwhelm with complexity, and by the time we work through it all, we don't understand what the kernel is. So there's complexity. Complexity is great, obviously, and sophistication is great, but complexity that masks something that's more simply said, it's a problem. It's a problem for us judges looking at your music, but much more importantly, it's a problem for your performers. It's a problem for your conductors. They're going to have to wade through this immense level of complexity to get to the kernel of the music. In general, you want to notate your music in the clearest possible way that you know how. So your musical idea needs to come through. So just a few examples of things that we see with some frequency that, again, are kind of red flags in terms of sort of potentially unnecessary complexity. Many of you, I'm sure, know the music of Thomas Adès, and you know about his irrational meters. If you use them, great. Make sure that you're using them, first of all, correctly, properly, that they mean what you think they mean. And secondly, that they are the best way to convey the kind of rhythmic idea that you have. If something can be better expressed or more easily expressed by metric modulation, or even some kind of hemiola do that, it's much clearer. And the irrational meters are still sort of new for performers. And if they're not necessary, find a better way to notate them. Any kind of super complex rhythmic situation, again, we're going to work through it. We're going to try to figure out what you're going for, what you're doing. But multiple nested tuplets within the context of rubato, it's like these kinds of things that are really, really complicated and probably not going to be rendered by living musicians. We just sort of question, sort of why do we do this? If we work through the complexity and we find something really interesting and beautiful and compelling, then it was worth it. It was great. It needs to be there. Just make sure that your complexity is part of the musical idea and it's necessary. Another thing that we see more and more lately are impractical uses of microtones. So again, microtones are great. They've been around for a long time. Berg used them. Right? They're quite established now. But if we have a complex wind texture, for instance, with the oboe minus 17 cents and the clarinet plus 22 cents and the flute minus 32, essentially it's creating a situation that your performers almost certainly aren't going to be able to, your average performer is not going to be able to render. Your average conductor, even very, very fine conductor, is not going to be able to hear it. And so it's kind of an unenforceable situation. If you have microtonal fingerings, even though those are imperfect, at least there's a sense of what we're going for. But if we have essentially a kind of homophonic situation with the winds, everybody's slightly out of tune, but slightly out of tune in very, very prescribed intervals. Again, like I said, minus 17 cents, et cetera. We wonder what that's about. And we have to work through it and try to figure out what the musical idea is behind that. It's really important that you give us, if you use anything unusual, give us detailed explanations about what you're doing, but don't give us explanations about things that are obvious. We don't need in your program notes at the beginning of the piece, we don't need a definition of a trill, a rapid unmetered oscillation between two adjacent pitches. We know what a trill is, everybody does. All the standard stuff, it's fine. It's not impressive to define things that we already know about. And again, you're just gonna give the judge something to distract them from the piece itself, which is what's important. And lastly, the invention of new symbols for things that already exist. So we have ties, we have slurs, we know what these mean. We have trills. Don't invent a symbol for a trill. Don't invent a new way to write a tie unless it's absolutely necessary, unless you're telling us something very new about these things. Use the materials that you have, use the language that exists, and again, present yourself in the clearest possible way. Essentially, you can kind of wrap this last bit up with this example. So what we don't want is this kind of situation. You may have seen this online around. We don't want this situation where we have to work through a complex notation, and at the end of the day, what we wind up with is, I'm going to pop over to the piano and render this for you. Etc. Right, so don't make people work through very complex notation in order to get to something simple. Express your ideas clearly and succinctly, and let us deal with the music, the real material, and not with the surface. Great, so just a few last things. what kind of work should you submit? Just some suggestions on how to choose and submit your best work. There is a myth that only orchestra pieces win competitions. It's not true. Again, from the perspective of the judge, I am spending 1 to 2 hours a day looking at your scores. I've just looked through my 8th 80-page large orchestra piece of the day. I am thrilled that you submitted a flute piece. The solo flute piece comes up after 8 80-page orchestral pieces. I'm thrilled about your solo flute piece, and I'll be able to spend a lot of detailed time. I'll be primed to really get into it. I'll spend a lot of detailed time on that piece, and I'll really give it as much attention as I can. So just from our perspective as human beings, we like variety. Don't think you need to send a big orchestra piece in order to win. That said, ambitious pieces do well in competitions. And this makes sense. So if you send us a really lovely solo violin piece, Andante amabile, no matter how beautiful it is, it probably isn't going to be super competitive against a more ambitious work, 15-minute solo piano work, or even a 5-minute, really detailed, gritty solo cello piece, right? So ambition is good because it shows the breadth of your abilities and the breadth of your interests. So choose, absolutely choose your best work. If your best work is that 2-page solo violin piece, send it, please. But try to send us pieces that you think show us who you are as a composer and what you can do. So in that way, ambition is good. Always submit your best work. And how do you choose your best work? So don't base it on something that had a great performance necessarily, or even something that won an award before, let's say. That's not necessarily going to be your best work. Your best work is the work that you feel best represents what you can do and what you want to do as a composer. If you have a trusted teacher and you think that your teacher really understands you and gets you, ask them to help you choose a piece. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it has to be a piece that you feel it's the best expression of what you want as a composer. And that's important because, and this is my very final point, you are unique. By default, you are unique. There is no other person on earth that has your musical DNA. You think about music differently from everybody else. You love music that I hate. You know and you understand music that the next composer doesn't. All of the influences and ideas and thoughts and desires that you have go together to make up a unique individual that has something unique to say. So trust that, trust who you are, and find the best music that expresses that uniqueness. Whatever that is, whoever you are, write that music and share it with us. We are thrilled when a piece succeeds. When we see a piece that does something that we had never seen before, that solves a problem in some elegant way, that deals with a form in a new way, or an ensemble, makes us rethink the way a string quartet works. This is the great joy of being a judging competition, is that we see these pieces that totally surprise us and amaze us. Those are the pieces we want, and you have that unique spark. Just find it, cultivate it.